a huge welcome and a huge thanks to actor Jason Watkins for joining me this morning to discuss the petition to add content on death, dying and bereavement into the national curriculum. Interestingly, we have had a smile because Jason has connections to Shropshire. He grew up in Albrighton, and he also had a connection to Bridgnorth where I live. So that was a very interesting thing to learn last night when I was doing my research on him. But yeah, thank you, Jason, again for this morning for joining me. And we're just discussing about how adding content into the national curriculum on discussing the emotions and feelings surrounding a loss, how it can help society and make it a kinder place. What's your thoughts on, Jason, on this?
Well, I mean, thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about things, and saying that you had lost your mother when you were 12, and obviously that's something that really fires you, not only sort of inspires you to do the work you do, but it's deeply connected to you. And it's inevitable, isn't it? I think sometimes that when these things happen when you're young, that they do shape you in many ways. Is it a family business, your funeral direction?
Yes, it is. It's myself, my father, my sister, and like even the team that are there are like family as well. So it's very close knit.
Yeah, and I think it's no surprise in a way that you've found purpose in your work and in what you're doing in terms of the curriculum. And what happens, I think, how we view death and how we see it in society. And generally, I think it's fair to say that most people are, I've been thinking a lot about it recently actually, that people are scared of it. Essentially, they're scared of its the pain and not being able to cope perhaps. I mean, I lost my own father in the middle of last year, and there's all sorts of emotions that come with it. In my experience, obviously we lost our daughter Maude in 2011 to sepsis, and she was taken to hospital and was discharged. Symptoms reoccurred. We took her back again, and we were reassured, and she was discharged yet for the second time, and she died on New Year's Day in the morning. So it's almost Dickensian, really, what happened to us. And we've been, I've been campaigning. So I have, they're the two things that sort of inspire and inspire me, like your experience of losing your mother, Jen. So, I was fascinated in that when this petition that you put forward came up, our older daughter, who's now 15, they were sisters together. Betty, she was older than, 2 years, 20 months older than Maude. So her life has really, changed, and we have to keep an eye on her and we have to look after her, and it's not easy. And she is a typical teenager, and she's strong and feisty and all those sorts of things, but there are sort of lines, and I can't say that we're really good, we're brilliant at it. It's really difficult. We're very protective of her, maybe have been too overprotective of her.
What was her experience at school? Was there any communication around what was going on at school? And again, how did that spill over to within your family?
Well, I think what happened was that Betty was still at nursery, so I was able to argue with the local authority that she could go to a particular school where most of her classmates from that nursery were going. So there's a duty of care because of what happened to her that continues, I think, into university. It's interesting if you think, well, you've got that facility, maybe there are other things, which is why what you are talking about, that kind of support was available. So the teachers were excellent at the school. I would say that, there wasn't anything particularly in the statute book. It wasn't something that it was their, humanity and sensitivity and all those things. It's the next
being humane, just talking, being kind.
Yeah. So, if you extend that into what what you've been talking about, it opens up a very interesting conversation. But I think, people are sort of scared to talk about it. That's our experience of it.
Yeah.
Some people are really good about talking about it, and will come up and say, "I'm really sorry to hear about your daughter. I know it's been many years, but it must be very hard for you, and I feel for you." Things like that are really lovely, but people often are scared to say the wrong thing. Genuine, fear of hurting you.
Do you think, though, again, if you were taught this stuff at school about the feelings and the emotions that surround a loss, do you think that naturally that will help you as you grow older into adulthood life? These tools will be there which you can sort of use in knowing how to talk to your friends as well as you grow older?
Yeah. You could argue that part of the curriculum should have within it coping mechanisms and discussions and work and outreach things about many subjects to do with families. But particularly, that's difficult because each family is different and has a different complexion. So in a way, it's difficult to go into families because it could then become complicated. But something like bereavement is something that is common across everyone's experience. And, grandparents die typically, don't they, when children are at school? So there is that to think about. And there are things that we know about being able to talk about it, try and share your feelings and offering help to others. And you can talk about other countries and how they look at death. I'm a great believer, that death is part of life and it doesn't have to be in your consciousness all the time, but it very much is. I'm 60 now and I'm going to pass away at some point. What's my attitude to that? What am I going to do? I'm going to be running away from it. I'm less scared of death itself since my own daughter died. I hope I have a sort of responsible attitude towards it, and that I'm far less scared of it. And if I were to start drifting away, that it wouldn't be something that would scare me. And I think that's important to translate to my children, because they'll be scared of the loss, etc.
And that's what I believe as well. Once you have an understanding of death, because I arrange funerals now for people in their 50s and 60s who've never considered that their parents who are arranging the funeral for might pass away one day. And the trauma that brings is, I think it's high level. So again, having some awareness earlier on, not only does it make it easier at that time, it's still going to be sad and difficult, and everybody's different and unique. One size doesn't fit all. I think, like you said, having death part of life results in a better way of living for all, an appreciation, a gratitude, an understanding, a more care and kind way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when your parent dies, it's a really difficult time because but depending on how old you are, and I know your experience is tragically young, but even when you're my age, it's difficult to think, am I doing all that he would have wanted? Am I getting enough people to the funeral? Are we going to say the right things? Even down to the flowers and all those sorts of things. It's fine, but it is very difficult, and you don't want to let your parent down. All those sorts of things.
That's what I've looked at from this, a bigger picture. It does tie into a funeral. It highlights the importance of why we have a funeral, but actually just the emotions and loss, to discuss that is the priority on this.
Yeah.
But it ties into actually why do we have a funeral service for, and it shows the importance of saying goodbye. You mentioned about parents, that you can lose grandparents as well. You mentioned that, which again is more frequent for younger people. You're losing a parent in the UK every day. It's 111 newly bereaved children every single day in the UK. So that's for a young person to lose a parent. But like what you've been through, to lose a child, there's that in there as well. And there's also youngsters losing uncles, aunties, and even their pets. So it's just actually conversations and awareness of loss, but it's just our overall relationship with death, and that's what I really want to try and tackle.
Yeah, having pets, that's one of the ways, isn't it, of helping introducing children to bereavement. The pet has been a constant in your life, and I think that's the thing, is like, as you say, uncles could be a constant in a child's life from birth, and so when they lose one and they're no longer sort of physically part of their world, that's a very difficult place to be. And it's important that children are allowed to talk about it in the education system. You've got to respect people grieve differently, but encouraging people to talk about it, even if they feel, I don't feel like talking to anyone, that in itself is kind of saying something, and just sharing and not demonizing it and making it feel as though it's a horrendous thing that it's better people just don't do it on their own, because the death rates within men, which is extraordinary. Suicide rates within men, and women, of course. But if you start the very idea of conversation at a young age, in whatever sphere, and we're talking about bereavement, that really is going to help.
My last question for you is quite a deep one. From what you went through with the loss of Maude, and what you've learned from that time around grief and loss, if you could go back now to the version of you now, could go back to Jason Watkins of that time, what advice would you give him based around what you've learned on grief and loss?
What I would say was that when you lose a child, it's traumatic, and traumatic is a very overused word. Trauma is a very disturbing and discombobulating, devastating, almost obliterating feeling when you lose your child, because time goes strange, you can't believe it's happened. And in those very early days, it's a very difficult, dark place to be. Just on a tangent, it's really good when people come to your house, even if they're just there, and help with practical things. We had lots of soup, things like that. Presence is really important. I would say is that physical trauma of loss, where if it's a child, your heart aches, literally aches, and you feel the loss of them in their hand in yours, all that, all those sorts of things like the clothes, and just simply the physical absence is incredibly difficult. What I would say to myself and what I'd say to other people is that kind of trauma, which is so intense, and you just don't think, how can we ever continue to live? That does lessen. It's always going to be there, but it does lessen. So, you are able to carry on, and there's no time scale. But what I would say is that physical stuff, which you think, oh my God, is it going to be like this forever, does dissipate a little. And by sharing it and talking, certainly that helps. But I wouldn't say time is a healer, because that's just too much of a platitude, and it isn't quite true.
And would you say as well that you take Maude with you? Like she's still part of you? Like my mum, in what I'm doing, everything I'm trying to achieve, she's my fuel. She's part of me, and it fires me on to do this stuff, to help other people. So even though physically they're not here, emotionally, and that love continues.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And what happens is I think that when you think about your mum, and when I think about Maude, and it's often painful, but then I feel so much better having done so. Retaining the contact. We do say, we carry her with us, and consciously or subconsciously, we do. And I think I'm certainly a better person because of what has happened. I think of things differently, and I'm less selfish, and all those things. I have a sort of power like you do, but that you don't have to have them. It's about you coming to terms with loss and understanding it, and that it won't stop you living and looking after other people around you, and laughing to come and things like that.
And that's what I'll come on to, what you've said there as well. The experience has put you and I in this position, but actually I don't think you have to have an experience to have these feelings. And again, by discussing at an early age, we can help instill compassion and empathy throughout society. You and I believe we want to help people now more. We're less selfish because of our experiences, but again, with the conversations created, it really excites me about how more positive society can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can imagine children talking amongst themselves and talking about it and being able to share it, that it is almost beyond the friendships, natural friendships that they find, that they're able to, reach out to other classmates and other people and have a sense of it, when emotions arrive, and bereavement can open a door to those kinds of things that perhaps equip children and take away the fear of bereavement.
Well, Jason, I think that's a wonderful time to end the conversation there. And just again, a huge thanks to you for your time this morning. I know how busy you are with your current series has been released as well, so you're a busy man. So
rushing around.
So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.